Deputy Boyd-Barrett.
Taoiseach, since the cost of living crisis erupted, and ordinary people face being crucified by energy price hikes, heating price hikes, accommodation and rental costs and the cost of living, we have sought to point out that this is not some natural phenomena, but that some people are benefiting from the misery and hardship that others are suffering. Last week we pointed out the enormous jump in profits for energy companies, electricity suppliers, oil companies and so on. The latest evidence of the argument we are making, which the government is determinedly ignoring, comes in the form of Iris REIT's accounts, which show that the biggest landlord in the country, Iris REIT, Property Investment Fund, saw their profits jump in 2021 by 15.8%, up to 67.5 million. Their investment properties grew by 6.7%, up to 79.7 million. And a figure I find really shocking is that their net rental income margin was 79%. 79%. So the corporate landlords, the property investors are absolutely creaming it on the back of the cost of living misery and the absolutely obscene rents that are being charged to their tenants. And you can just see it. The DAF figures at the beginning of this month showing rents up by 10.3% for the last year on year for the last quarter. It had been 7% during the pandemic, already dramatic increases, rising as soon as the pandemic ends. In some parts of rural Ireland, rents up by as much as 22%. So now average rents, €1,524 a month. In South Dublin, 2,258. Across Dublin City, 2,145. And this leads directly to more people facing homelessness. During the pandemic, when you were forced, under pressure, to introduce an eviction ban and a ban on further rent increases, the number of families and individuals in homeless accommodation dropped to about 7,000. It has steadily risen since you lifted those bans, and is now up to 9,000. We don't have the figures yet for the beginning of 2020, but I can tell you they're going to go up. And we will be back towards the 10,000 figure of individuals and families who are homeless. So I ask you, Taoiseach, very simply, will you finally do something about the profiteering and price gouging of landlords and introduce actual rent controls? Similar, for example, to those that have been introduced in the last 2 years in France, where they're now setting maximum reference rents above which landlords cannot go.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
We have introduced rent restrictions in this country. I'm just back from Berlin. The rent freeze there didn't work. Completely dysfunctional impact on the market and didn't work at all. And so we have to learn lessons. But the fundamental point, I read the DAF.ie report, the fundamental point is we need to build more houses. 20,000 houses a year, 1,000 houses a year is not enough, and is a huge factor in terms of where rents are. And we have to really concentrate on getting houses built as fast as we possibly can. And that's social houses, affordable houses, and yes, private development as well, and some of that will be private rental. But the funds and the institutional funds represent about 7% of the rental market across the country. Not the entirety of the market at all. And as I've said repeatedly, of that 33,000 figure, we expect 6,000 on an ongoing basis would be of a private rental nature. But the bulk of it will be up to 10,000 social houses directly built by funding from the state through local authorities or through approved social housing body. The biggest rent supports are through the HAP, Housing Assistance Programme, and RAS, which are funded by the state and the taxpayer as well. And so there's an enormous, unprecedented allocation of funding to get houses built in this country. And thankfully, 31,000 homes were commenced in 2021, which really illustrates for the first time in quite a while that we're making progress. The pandemic did hit us. In 2020, the long lockdown, and in 2021 did impact on construction and supply, but we're catching up fast. The 31,000 homes is the highest since 2008. We had about 20,400 completed in 2021, and the number of apartments completed increased by over 30%. We actually need that increase. We need a whole range of house types, apartment types built in this country if we're ever to get near the scale that we need to be at consistently over the 10-year period. But there are times when I don't think people realise the scale of what's involved or the need to do what we have to do. About 46,000 homes were purchased in 2021. Again, about 30% of these being bought by first-time buyers. There were nearly 40,000 planning permissions granted in the year to Q3 2021. And in terms of the capacity of the industry, construction apprenticeship registrations in 2021 increased by over 40% compared to 2019, and employment in construction is back to pre-pandemic level. So housing for all is working, but it's going to take a number of years to get to where we want it to be, unfortunately. And rent restrictions are in place. 2% are linked to the cost of living index. And we have to...
Taoiseach, seriously, your arguments are utterly threadbare. You mentioned HAP. I've just told you rents in Dublin are over 2,000. The highest rent a HAP payment you can get is 1950. Right, so that means if you're looking for a HAP tenancy and you've got a housing crisis, you might as well just walk up to the nearest homeless hostel. That's the reality of what is going on. But the biggest fantasy you're peddling is that you're delivering additional social housing in any substantial numbers. In the first 3 quarters of last year, actual construction of new social housing by local authorities and approved housing bodies was 1,084 in the entire country. The rest you're getting from the same build-to-rent developers, the private developers who are creaming it and charging extortionate rents. They're not only charging extortionate rents to tenants, they are also crucifying the public coffers with the long-term leasing arrangements. So you're not building the social housing. And you just walk around Dublin, walk around my area, look at all the cranes, look at all the apartment blocks. I guarantee you virtually none of them are social housing.
Thank you, Deputy.
All the construction workers that should be building affordable and public housing on public land are actually building housing to make profits for property investors. And that is why we have a housing crisis, and you will do nothing about it.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach.
You're wrong. And the last number of housing projects that I opened were all social housing projects. All social housing projects. Completed. Sorry? The ones I opened were social housing projects, completed. And the first quarter of last year, we had a lockdown. You know that, Deputy. It was a full lockdown of construction.
Walk around the city.
In the first quarter of last year.
Check how many is public housing.
And we have introduced rent restrictions. And we're going to develop cost rental houses also. And we've capped in the rent pressure zones rents at 2%. No, supply is the ultimate answer to this. And we've got to build houses of all types. And we need all sectors involved in housing. Your problem is you don't think the private sector should be involved at all. Is your ideological position. No. You're entitled to it.
I just don't think the state should be facilitating their profiteering.
But that will not guarantee the level and scale of housing that we require. We do need private house builders. We need private house builders to build houses. We need local authorities to build houses, and they are, and we've resourced them to do it. And we need approved social housing bodies to build houses, and they are, to increasing extent and to very high standards, as I have witnessed myself in opening a variety of schemes so far.
Council houses.
And we need to develop cost rental, which we're going to do, and continue to provide protections and indefinite duration and so on, other protections to renters also.